Hi there, Danielle. Delighted to have you here today with me.
Delighted to be here.
It's great. We go back a bit, don't we?
We do indeed.
We do. We've lots to talk about. We're going to talk about communication and all that you suggest, because I know that's one thing that is really kind of, I think that we've lost touch with.
Yes.
I think you'll agree with that. So we're going to find ways of being able to help and bring that back to people's lives. So really, I suppose I want to start with talking a bit about yourself. So tell us a bit about you, Danielle.
So, as you know,
yes.
you know a little bit about me. Yes. I'm half Irish, half Italian, and came over here as a little lost, confused young girl, and had a journey of self-discovery. I went through a major traumatic event about 10 years ago now, which led me on a journey of self-discovery, which led me to studying all about communication, both for myself internally, primarily that was what it was for, and then later to how to communicate more effectively to others. So it led me to study hypnosis. I became an NLP trainer, which stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. So basically how you program your mind but through your communication, both to yourself and to others, and went on to write a book about it. And so that's kind of how we met, and on this journey.
It's so fascinating. Like, obviously, NLP is exactly where we started out. We did that together, and I hadn't a clue what it was all about initially. But it is amazing, communication skills and how they can change everything aspect of your life once you can take more control of that and can kind of use that to your advantage. Yeah. And communication is such an important thing that, unfortunately, is a lot of young people are losing sight of. It's all this now, isn't it? Social media, and it's all, that's the way they're communicating now. So, and it is such an important thing to kind of teach and show young people how to bring this back into their lives and how to do it. So what would you suggest? What would you suggest? I suppose, what's the importance of communication, first of all, would you say?
Well, it's a great question and a big question.
Yes, very big.
And probably not something we can answer fully in this interview.
Yes.
But communication is everything. It's everything. It's what we're here for. It's what we're here as human beings on this planet to do, is to communicate and build relationships. That is, in fact, what's instinctually in us, is the need to want to connect with others. And if that need to want to connect with others is somehow broken, or we have formed unhelpful, unbeneficial patterns in our life, then we're going to be struggling, seriously struggling through life, very unhappy. And that is unfortunately how I believe we have gone as a society. We've lost that ability to recognise our the power that we have in how we communicate with each other, which leaves us feeling lonely, isolated, fearful, scared, because obviously instinctively we all know that, going back to the days of the saber-toothed tiger, if you stood out from the crowd, you would be the one that would be eaten.
Yes.
You would be the one that would be targeted. So that instinct is so strong in us to feel part of a group, to feel connected, both with our parents, with our peers. And if we don't have that, we are left feeling very, very bad. And unfortunately, I believe that is the case with young people and with us as grown-ups, as adults.
So how do we get that self-awareness?
Good question. So it all starts with basically going back to how we begin as such. When we come into this world, we start off as wanting to have that connection. That's an instinctual want and need to have that connection with the first literally person that comes along, which in most cases is our parents. Yes. Okay, and if it isn't our parents, we will attach to whatever, or the nearest person, thing, being that we can, so that we have that attachment and that connection. And we spend the first few years of our lives establishing, I call it a lot in NLP terms about establishing a base. And as you know, I'm a martial artist, hence the name, the Black Belt Mastermind. Yes. But it's about establishing a base. And if you don't have a strong, solid base, then you can't move to the next stage. And unfortunately what happens is a lot of us don't have that strong, solid base, through no fault necessarily of our parents or whatever, but they're giving off body cues. So for example, as you know, communication is broken down into many components, okay? Our words are only 7%. So 55% of that is our body language. So if you have a stressed parent, even if they're doing everything right, or so they feel, they're going to, unfortunately, they're going to give off certain vibes to their child that maybe they're stressed, anxious, for whatever it may be. Now that child is going to see that as, they're going to take it personally, unfortunately. They are at that stage, they're going to think that means that I'm doing something wrong. So it's not about apportioning blame, it's about recognizing it. Recognizing that that may happen. Okay, now what you do for that is, so that's establishing that connection. We want to really make our child feel connected as a child. And if that's missing, if that base is unstable, then that child can't progress effectively to the next stage of their development, which is individualization. So what happens in most cases, in my case, as a young child, I didn't have a stable base. I had a very, very rocky base. And again, it's not about apportioning blame to my parents, but I had a rocky base. Okay, and it was very, very rocky. So I didn't have that stability. So I went on from the clinging to my parents' stage to saying, okay, I'm going to cling to anybody to get them all to like me, so that I try and get that sense of security. So I put on a mask, as I often talk about, and I put a smile on my face. So I wasn't being authentic. I wasn't integrated into my own visualization. So I never got to the stage of really learning how to say no, how to say yes, how to really say what I wanted, because I had that rocky base. Now, if we are aware of that as parents, as teachers, as adults, we can help to re-establish that sense of security, that sense of attachment with our children, our loved ones, and be aware of that so that they can feel safe first before they can move on to the next stage of becoming self-aware. So if that's missing, you can't move to the next stage, and which is what most of us do. We have a child, for example, who is doing something that's not beneficial for them, not productive, okay, and we try and set down rules or boundaries, or in the school we try and set down rules and say, okay, you know, if you do this, this is the punishment, or, you know, whatever. Hopefully we're moving on a bit from that. That isn't the approach. That isn't a beneficial approach. The best approach is to really, really get to know that child, get to know that person, or if you're talking about yourself, get to know yourself. Really listen to why you're doing things, because in general it's because you're not being authentic, you're not being congruent to what you really want. You're just doing something to form a sense of attachment. And
just to form a sense of acceptance and to fit in.
To fit in with that group.
I think this is the problem. And I think that so many young people are just trying to fit in and trying to feel that acceptance. And they're not allowing themselves to be themselves, who they want to be. And it's about discovering about their natural ability to be able to do things and kind of be more authentic. And I think being authentic is the key, really, for everything. But it's how do we teach that? And how do we show children? As you said, it's really important through educational routes to be able to show children new ways and to kind of have more of an understanding of them. And, the system, the way things are now at the moment, there's a lot of need for improvement, and we need to be more in touch with children's feelings, because their emotional intelligence is really what we need to really trying to build and trying to encourage. I think obviously it's something that you talk about all the time, about communication. To have that skill is so key. It's so important. Like, that's ultimately it. And it's interesting saying about verbally, we only have 7%, is that it? And the rest is communication. So we use our hands and we can be all very animated, but those sort of things, those sort of skills are really something that we should try and be teaching our kids, because they do help them through life.
It changed my life.
Changed your life. And look at you now, from the child that you wore the mask, you pretended to be something you weren't feeling happy in that. But you discovered yourself. And what key tips would you suggest? Like, what things, because really there has to be certain steps that you would have taken. I know you had reached rock bottom before you actually came out, and I know this is the sad truth of the matter, is that a lot of young people have to learn the hard way. But to bounce back from that.
Well, unfortunately, yes, I did reach rock bottom, and it was either go one direction or go the other. And thankfully, I decided to pick myself back up. It was very close. and go on that journey of self-discovery, self-awareness. And the steps, as I often talk about, is first establishing that base. Before you can even become self-aware, as I said, you need to feel safe. So for me, it was a matter of feeling that I could literally breathe again. Because a lot of young people, they're anxious. Older people, we're in this sense of anxiety and stress because we're in survival mode. Or so we think. Okay, so we're so anxious and stressed. So the first thing is, again, starting to feel safe, starting to recognize that. And you do that instead of, I talk about it a lot in a martial arts metaphor about, one of our principles in martial arts, and similar in a principle when you learn NLP, is that whatever you push against is going to push back. So you go with the path of least resistance. The more you try to force it, the more that force, they talk about two opposite forces, it's going to push back. So instead of trying to repel the thought or the anxious feeling or push it away or deny it, which a lot of us do, which makes us more anxious and more stressed, is to just accept it and pay attention to it. So if you have a feeling in your tummy, in your chest, or you have thoughts in your head, listen to them. If you have a feeling of anxiousness in your body, pay attention to it, because the paying attention to it actually helps it dissipate a little bit. The more you try to push it away, the more it's going to come back up and fight back. So that's the first stage.
The problem then, so it's just...
Yes. Yeah, and you're amplifying it. You're actually making it stronger, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So what we were repelled
totally
fights
unaware
back.
of that,
Yeah. So most of us are. I mean, I was 36, 37 when I actually discovered this. So this isn't just for young children. This is something we should be taught as a young child, how to acknowledge our feelings, sit with them, instead of trying to repress them, because then they come out in other ways, unhelpful ways, in anger, in frustration, in tantrums, and in bullying, in all these different type of manners, in hiding, and in becoming introvert, and self-harming. So instead of repressing it, pay attention to it, okay, and just sit with it, and then maybe ask yourself a question. Why have I got this feeling? What is the benefit? There's a part of me in here that is attempting to do something here by having this feeling. And what happens in most cases is you discover that all the parts that are making you do this unhelpful behavior, whether it's isolating yourself, whether it's acting out in a violent manner, whether it's whatever, all those parts are trying to do the same thing, which is to protect you from hurt, and that feeling of terrified. That's where that feeling of fear comes from. I was 36 years of age, and I was so afraid. I had all the feelings that I'd had as a little 9-year-old girl and feeling abandoned. I was that little girl once again, because I'd repressed them then.
Yeah.
And they came back up because I'd never actually sat with them.
Never dealt with that.
Yeah.
And this is something, as you said, is so important, that we really need to be able to try and teach this.
Yeah.
Because this is, this should be the core of any education, any child's life. They should be able to deal with their emotions and be able to know how to handle situations.
Yes.
And it's, it's one of those things that needs to be taught, like every other subject, is that the mental health of a child has got to be the core of education, has got to be the forefront, has to be so important. And they're not something that you can kind of deal with. How does a child, we find it difficult as grown-ups to be able to deal with anxiety and stress and all these sort of feelings that we have. To be able to teach resilience and be able to teach those strengths to children while they're growing up and teach them along the way should be really the main focal point of our education.
Absolutely.
It
has to be.
It has to be changed. Has to
if that isn't the intent in a teacher, in a leader, in a parent, if that isn't their intention, then it's not going to have an effect. If our intention is to criticize or find fault or to label or to put in a box or to try and repress or get them to behave, then it's going to have a very negative impact, obviously. So, I mean, you asked me what are the stages and what can you do about it? I mean, I suppose, as I said, becoming aware, whether it's for yourself or for somebody else. If you see a child that is acting in a behavior that is not beneficial, then maybe listen to them, ask them why. listening is the first step, whether you're listening to yourself and what's going on internally, or whether you're listening to somebody else. Listen, because that's what they're lacking.
Yes.
If somebody is acting out, I mean, I recently gave a talk, I'll just give it very quickly, and there was a gentleman, lovely gentleman at the front, who was, and there's always a couple of them, you know, who was kind of being a little bit, not a heckler, but he basically came to my talk, but he wanted to say his opinion. So at the end of the session, people were saying, you know, will we just let him speak? Okay. But the point was, I knew that this person was acting out simply. This person was a very smart, clever gentleman, lovely man. He was crying out for help, because that's why he was speaking up, because he wanted to be heard and nobody was listening to him. So I knew immediately that he was lacking. Anybody that's been loud, anyone that's been boisterous, is behaving in this way, they're crying out for help. And if we stop and we listen and we actually hear what they're really saying in between the lines, then we'll see we're still following through with the same childhood behaviour, even as an adult, that we did when we were 5, 6, 7, 8 years of age. So the first step is simply listening and rebuilding that connection.
Okay.
And if that isn't done, nothing can progress, because I always talk about state first.
Yes.
If you're not in the right state emotionally, you can't learn.
No.
You cannot take in information. You're just passing out information. It's just hitting a brick wall. So unless you're the child or yourself is in the right state, you're not going to take in information. You're not going to be willing to learn. You're not going to be willing to be receptive. So that first stage is the most crucial stage, is to get somebody else, whoever it is, somebody that you love, a parent, a child, whoever, into that state first, and then they are receptive. Then it's like the brain waves, they're listening.
Absolutely. And it's so important to find someone that you can actually trust and talk to about your problems, because obviously there's going to be so many different situations, so many different, things that are happening in our lives on a daily basis. And a lot of young people don't know how to deal with them, don't know how to cope. But to speak to somebody and to be able to have someone that they can talk to about that is so crucial as well. Suppressing and keeping all those emotions and those sort of feelings to yourself is not a good thing. We need to express them. Expression, self-expression.
Yeah.
Tell me what your take is on.
So when we speak, we tend to, most people, I wasn't aware of my own internal voice. I wasn't aware of how I spoke to myself and whether that was good or bad. I always thought that was just the way it was. And you can hear when people communicate that they're saying it. All the issues that you have and that somebody else has, all you've got to do is listen to them and you'll hear it screaming out from their unconscious. It's coming out. They'll say things like, I just can't help it. I can't stop these thoughts. This is just the way I am. You will hear all the stuff that's going on. When I became aware of what I was saying inside, I realised how unbeneficial. It's not about, and I always say this, it's not about positive thinking. I believe positive thinking is more beneficial. It's about smart thinking. Okay. People say as a hypnotist, people say to me, I don't know if I believe in hypnotism. I don't believe in NLP. Is it pseudoscience? Is it rubbish? Well, I say to them, what do you do when you wake up in the morning? And most people think their day is going to go badly. And is that good? Is that going to be good or bad? It's simply influence. You're influencing yourself. So as a hypnotist is simply somebody who's aware that you're able to learn. If you're able to learn, then you're able to take suggestion, which means that you are hypnotizable. That's all that hypnosis is. That's all that influence is. So if you want to influence somebody, you follow certain steps. You get them in the right state. You get them receptive so that they'll be compliant and listening. And then you can suggest to them a better response. Same as yourself waking up in the morning. If you suggest that your day is going to go well, then your brain has a direction to take. So,
because we are like computers. So it's like we need to program our brains and our minds to be able to think about the positive things and give ourselves a positive. That's what I love about gratitude journals and things like that.
Yeah.
To be grateful for something. It's like if we're having a bad day, I say to my kids, if they're having a bad day, to focus on the best part of the day or make something better of the day rather than focus on the bad things that are happening. But it's the message and the signal, as you said, that you send to your brain.
Yes.
And it's just a case of even write it down. I find writing things down really does help. If it's something that, this is where we come into the emotional intelligence, writing things down releases certain negativity and can also write down the positive things and kind of, give us more things to reflect on that are good or happening in our lives. Because there's always going to be something good. it's a good person, a good deed, a good something we can do. If we can't have that good thing, if something's not good happening, we can actually make it happen and make it good.
Yeah.
By even doing something nice for somebody even.
Absolutely. Well, we tend to go by what I call, in NLP terms, our map of the world.
Yes.
And, you've heard the story many times, you've heard me saying it.
Map is not the
about,
territory.
the map is not the territory. And what do I mean by that? I mean is we tend to base what we believe is reality based on everything that's happened in our experiences so far. In our life, we base it on that experience as far as we know it, and we think that is reality, but that is not the case. So like the little baby elephant that's tied to a tree, he pulls and pulls and pulls, eventually he gives up. And he grows up into a big baby elephant. He's still tied to that little tiny big baby elephant. He's still tied to that little branch. He can break it, no problem. But he doesn't. Why? Because he doesn't think he can. So we believe that reality is simply based on our perception of the world as we have known it so far, but that doesn't make it the truth. So when we do something like a gratitude journal, it's a little bit like brainstorming. We're opening our minds up to new possibilities. We're looking for new possibilities. It's not hocus pocus. It's not wishful thinking. It's actually expanding your viewpoint and your perspective so that you see the stuff that you had previously missed.
Yes.
So again, another way of talking about our brain, because our brain is not us. Our brain, we are something bigger than our brain, right? We are whatever you personally believe in, a spirit, a soul, an entity, energy, whatever you want to believe in, but we are something bigger. Our brain is simply a fantastic computer, but simply a computer. And like when you go on Google, you put in a command, it'll give you the results. If you ask how to make spaghetti bolognese, it doesn't give you a reply of how to get to Rome, right? It gives you how to make spaghetti bolognese.
Yes.
Might say how to make good spaghetti bolognese in Rome, but do you know what I'm going?
Yes.
Because it's a computer, it's following your instructions. When we realize we're not our brain, I use the example of a snow globe, often.
Yes,
if you imagine I'm holding a snow globe, and imagine the snow globe is your brain, that's your mind. And when you shake it, as we often do, we get very anxious, and children get anxious, and we get anxious. All those little flakes are your thoughts. But when you allow it to settle, your mind becomes clear, right? So the flakes are your thoughts. Your mind is the snow globe. But the real question is, who's holding the snow globe?
Absolutely.
You are. So when we realize, and that, I didn't really get that until I was 36, 37 years of age, when actually that really clicked and I realized, hang on a second, I am not my brain. I can direct my brain. And if children know that from a very early age, that what they put in is the result that they will get. So when you talk about a gratitude list, I say do your gratitude list in advance. That's what I call directional thinking and setting the course of your results. So if a child wakes up every morning, they do it at nighttime and say what they're grateful for, fantastic. They're establishing a very good base. Now they're in a good state. If they wake up in the morning and write down 3 things that they're going to be grateful for that day, like having been able to drink water, as many children can't,
Yes.
right? And when they drink that bottle of water, then when they're in school, they're going to go, they get a little bit of endorphins shooting into their brain, they feel a little bit better, and they start to realize, hey, I'm feeling good about myself because I actually said this. It was going to happen, and it did. I'm not talking about ridiculous, wild stuff. I'm talking about practical, everyday stuff, simple stuff that you know is going to happen and you feel good.
Yeah.
But it builds up. It builds up like a self-belief muscle in yourself. And there's a part of you inside your brain, I call it the little people, like Inside Out, the cartoon, that are saying, hey, when she says something, actually takes action. And when she says she's going to feel good about this, she feels good. So you're learning how to develop that self-belief muscle and that gratitude muscle so that you recognize and see more and more and more happening in the world. You're expanding your vision.
Absolutely. I love that. I think that's such a simple thing that can be so adaptable.
Yeah.
For everybody. Like things like, you're having a bad day, if you make your bed in the morning or, something, give yourself some little task and make yourself feel better about, little steps, small steps make the big changes. Take the small steps.
Yes.
And they will lead to bigger and better things, And, always, I think the problem with children is the creativity side of things. They have this amazing mind and creativity side of them, and they're able to come up with all these fantastic ideas, and you just watch them playing games and how magical that is.
Yeah.
And then it's just kind of, as the education, they're going through a system, and it's just stumped. It's just like, they're learning a different way. And it's unfortunately, it's something we see more and more of it. The light goes off in so many kids.
Yeah.
And the pressures become so more immense, so much more is demanded of them.
Yeah.
And it just gets further and deeper into a bad situation and can create all sorts of anxieties. And it's happening younger and younger now. So really we need to find ways to get back from this, and just to take little steps and little kind of give them these sort of tips. So really what I love to do is just find out just some simple tips as to what's the steps. I know you've gone through a few already.
So being aware of obviously being aware of yourself, how you're feeling. So paying attention to your emotion instead of pushing it away, recognize it and sit with it for a moment. And then ask yourself, what is this part trying to do? What is this part of me trying to do? It's trying to protect me, possibly. Okay, and what is it protecting me from? Probably what we imagine is the worst case scenario, which isn't realistic. So then what you do is, and if I was bringing somebody through a process of change, individually or in a group or whatever, what you would do is then you start to break down that negative belief. Okay, that unbeneficial belief. So asking yourself better questions. So ask yourself, is there something, like say for example, you're not feeling good, is there something, instead of saying, a lot of people come to me and they say, I want to feel happy. But sure, you don't want to feel happy all the time, because then you'd be a bit crazy, if you're feeling happy all the time.
Yes.
But you want to be happy, maybe you want to balance the scale so you feel happier most of the time. So instead of saying I want to be happy, which is kind of this elusive thing that is impossible to ever gain, this state of constant happiness, let's instead aim for feeling happier more often. Yes. That's more realistic and more practical and easier to feel like you could get. So when I was at my worst, instead of saying, I want everything to work out perfectly, I said, what can I do right now to make myself feel 1% better? And that's a very simple little step. You're talking about small steps, make big changes. If we start to be aware, and if as a child we start to be aware we can actually take back control, it's too overwhelming to get to the end result straight away. But if we start to take a little step, learn that we can believe in ourselves and we can just change our state even 1 degree, then it's like that domino effect.
Yes.
It's, motion, propels motion. So I would ask myself better questions. I would suggest to people to break down that unhelpful belief and ask yourself questions. How do I know 100% this is true? Is it possible that there could be another way I could do this? Is there a possibility that other people could feel a different way? Is there something that I can do to make myself feel a little bit better right now? So all of these things, change your physiology. I mean, if you look at anyone that's depressed, how are they sitting? They're not sitting like this, they're sitting like this. And vice versa, you don't see anyone coming in and saying, I'm really happy. So as children as well, if we become aware of our physiology, your physiology will change your mental state. It's very, very simple. So if we change our physiology, then we're tricking our brain. So we're setting off endorphins and serotonin and we'll start to feel better. So that would be a step. And becoming aware of your words, how you speak to yourself. Like, for example, very simply, a very common one I always say is get rid of the word try, unless you're a hypnotist, because then you'll use it in a different way. Okay? But if you use the word try, it implies failure to your unconscious mind. So if you're trying to do something, you're not doing something. If I say try to pick up that glass, don't pick it up, just try to pick it up. It's very different than doing something. So becoming aware of how much power our words have on ourselves and also on others is a key fundamental for saving my life, and I know transforming lives of others. So if we start to become aware of that, we gain back that control.
Great, wonderful. Because I think that's it. We need to kind of give ourselves more positive words rather than the doubts that we have and the negative sort of beliefs that we do carry. And to try and change the words and the language and try and I don't want to use try.
It's okay. Well, actually, you're making me think of another really, really common one. The word, and for school teachers, you should do your homework, or your parents say, you should do this, or you should do that, or you must do this, or you need to do this. How does that cause you to feel? Sit with it. And notice, if you're a teacher and if you say to yourself, you should do something, most people rebel against that. There's that, because again, it's that pressure I was talking about. We fight back when we feel pressure. we're actually not helping the child or ourselves if we use that type of language, because there's a part of us that's rebelling against it. So when we say, oh, you really need to sit down and do your study, or you really need to pay attention now, or you really need to, whatever, lose weight, or whatever you're saying to yourself, that's not beneficial. So a more beneficial, you're talking about positive language, would be, I want to. Or, you know, maybe you might want to now, you know, pay attention to this subject.
Absolutely.
That's, you know, as a hypnotist, I'm giving away hypnosis tricks.
Brilliant, yeah.
But that's how you influence somebody. If you want your partner to wash the dishes, if you want your child to clean their room, using powerful language like, you know, you might want to, is much more beneficial than saying you need to or you should, which is
demand.
the no-no.
Yeah, so the demand is not a good way to go.
Yeah.
You know, you'll get more results and a better kind of, you know, outcome if you say it in a nice way. And communicate, just talk in a nice way and try communication. Yet again, communication rather than the commands and demands that you put on young people.
We always do what we want, not what we need.
Right,
it's very, very simple.
Absolutely, yeah. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Keep it simple and the nice approach to things. And that all boils down to the communication that we actually, the language that we actually use and the communication skills that we use. And listen, it's been fantastic to have you, and thank you so much for all of your advice here today. It's been brilliant. And yes, I think it's amazing. I think it's something that we should all need to tap into more.
Yeah.
And if we could kind of use those skills and learn more about how to sit with our own feelings.
Yes.
And be able to, you know, digest it.
Yeah.
And find ways to get through it. There is ways. There's always ways, many ways. And it's just about tapping in, because we all hold the resources within ourselves. We all have that magical toolbox, and we all have the ability to change our lives. Yes. And nothing is impossible, really. It's all lies within.
Absolutely.
You know, with ourselves. Well, thank you so much, Danielle. It's been great having you today.
Thank you. Great to be here and talk to you, Karina.
Fantastic. And hope everybody's enjoyed listening to Danielle.